Just gonna. Do I need to wait for anything, or am I just good to start? That was what I thought. Okay, beautiful. Oh, you're the best. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Annual PCIARC Summit. We're really excited to have all of you here. My name is Sarah Florman. I am the current chair of the PCIARC, and I'm going to introduce the other commissioners real quick, and if folks could just stand up and wave when I call your name. We have Vice Chair Lara Forstrom from Ward 4, Commissioner Mike Darrow from Ward 7, Commissioner Dan Featherstone from Ward 1, Commissioner Kathy Grills from Ward 5 I don't believe she is able to be here this evening. Commissioner Aaron Hayes from Ward 3. Also a shout out to the St. Paul Central baseball team. Aaron will be leaving us a little early to watch her son's last baseball game of the season. So when she walks out, it's not in protest. Commissioner Mike Rademacher from Ward 6. Commissioner Nancy Rodenberg from Ward 3. And Commissioner Chevelle Webb from Ward 1. And I forgot to tell you this, but I am also Ward 6. So, thank you again all for being here tonight. It's a privilege to stand before you and share the work of the Police Civilian Internal Affairs Review Commission, also known as the PCIARC, over the past year. I'd like to begin by acknowledging This past year, the PCIARC reviewed 52 cases, which is the highest number since the commission transitioned to an all-civilian body. This milestone is more than a number. It represents the hard work, diligence, and commitment of our commissioners, staff, and community members who bring their voices and concerns forward. Our PCIARC coordinator, Sierra Cumberland, made meaningful strides in community engagement, attending or facilitating 27 events and presentations to raise awareness about the work of the commission. These efforts are vital to helping the community understand the role of our commission and how individuals can be involved in ensuring fair and just oversight. You'll see in our annual report, which there are copies of in the back, that the number of complaints submitted has been increasing steadily year after year. At first glance, this might seem troubling, but in reality, it's actually a sign that police-community relations are improving. It signals a growing public trust in the process and in the department's willingness to be held accountable. I want to take a moment to sincerely thank Chief Axel Henry and Commander, I just put your last name, Commander Kajacob. Yeah, we don't do first names, I guess, with Internal Affairs for their ongoing support of the civilian review process. Their openness in answering questions, listening to feedback, and responding to concerns has helped to ensure the Commission's work has meaning and value. A good example of this responsiveness occurred last year when commissioners noticed a rise in complaints related to domestic violence calls. These are among the most complex and dangerous calls that officers respond to. In response, the Commission provided some policy and training recommendations to improve outcomes in these situations. The department listened and acted, and that kind of cooperation is critical. We ask a great deal of our police officers. We ask them to enter situations that most of us would run from. We ask them to uphold the law while often witnessing the worst of human behavior. And we ask them to remain calm, professional, and fair, no matter what they're walking into. As the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics states, I will maintain courageous calm in the face of danger, scorn, or ridicule. And these are not just words, they're the foundation of what we expect from our police officers. The department's own policy, Section 150.02, Conduct Unbecoming an Officer, acknowledges that officers' actions are subject to far greater scrutiny than those in other professions. When an officer falls short, the consequences and the public criticism are amplified. And yet that's what makes this work so important. Every interaction between an officer and a member of the public carries weight. Tone of voice, body language, even a single word, these can shift a situation dramatically. And that's why our standards for professionalism are so high. The PCIARC takes its responsibilities seriously. We watch footage, we study reports, we comb through department manuals, we ask really tough questions, and we don't stop until we get answers. We challenge policies when they raise concern, and we acknowledge the difficulty and the nuance of police work. It's easy to be a critic in hindsight. It's much harder to be the person in the moment making split-second decisions. Our recommendations are grounded in the facts and standards laid out in department policy, but leadership is responsible for providing officers with the training, tools, and support to meet those standards. And they're equally responsible for building and sustaining the culture that the St. Paul Police Department has worked so hard to create. The community's role is just as vital. We ask you to continue putting your trust in this process and to hold us all accountable. We also ask for continued efforts from the department to strengthen transparency and deepen community ties. Together, we can build a St. Paul that works for all members of our community. Thank you. Going to Angie. Okay. And now I would like to call up to the podium Director Angie Weesey.
We'll come back to that one. Well, first, good evening, and I'm pitch hitting, but I am so glad to have been asked, and I was on one of the many interview panels to select our current police chief, and this topic came up in conversation, and I'm very, very grateful for the work of the PCIARC. This is very tinny, so I'm going to try to angle it a little bit further. All right. Director of Commerce, help me get this down to 20 minutes. So I'm going to try to go fast. But I'm Angie Weesey. I'm the Director of Safety and Inspections. And the work that we do not do it alone. And we have great partnerships with HERO. We have great partnerships with the police. And I will hit on some other partnerships that we have across the city as I go through these. But we're all in. And the mayor often says that he tends to use the word enterprise. We're going to we bring all of our tools and all of our assets to every situation that comes in front of us. So focusing on housing, and the city looks at housing in kind of this, it's not just about producing more housing. We have to protect the housing we have, and this got a little strange in this version, but that's all right, we'll figure it out. The words, so produce, protect, and preserve. And so we really need to preserve the housing that we have, the housing stock we have. We're a very built up city. We've got a lot of old, we got a lot of unique, and those are wonderful spaces to have. But they take some maintenance, right? So we also need to create spaces where we can produce more housing and, again, protect people in the spaces that they call home. Part of this is the rent stabilization ordinance. So we call it RSO, but rent stabilization, on the face of it, no landlord can implement a rent increase more than 3%. There are exceptions, though. That's what people glom onto, is that 3%. But there are, a landlord has a right to earn a reasonable return on their investment. It's not a nonprofit. They're a for-profit company. They have a right to have a return on their investment. So there are ways that we capture that return on investment, and people have to justify that they've made an investment or to retain that investment. There are other exceptions related to low-income housing. So if the rent is dictated by HUD, well then that obviously supersedes any rules that we would have. And sometimes there's like deed restrictions on property where the deed actually restricts the rent. So that would supersede our rules. And then there's the new construction exception. And The one that is used, and I'll show you stats here, most frequently is actually the just cause vacancy request, which is kind of an exception, kind of not. It's in the middle because it still limits rent, but it gets to go, it's more of a formula to go above the 3%, and just cause just means that the person left voluntarily. So they found a new home, they moved in with a partner, they left the state for a new job. They left voluntarily. And so people are able to raise the rent after that person leaves 8% plus CPI. These are the stats for the time that rent stabilization has been in play. Again, you see that the just cause vacancy is far and away the most requested type of exception. And very, very few appeals. Complaints here is, when we say complaints, some people complain that they just don't like the policy. Like, they actually might be for the policy and they don't like the one that's adopted here, or they just don't like the policy in general. So the complaints aren't necessarily about rent being increased on their individual unit. We found that sometimes they actually are just about the policy in general. Fire safety inspections, this is actually where I started with the city. I'm working on year 20 here, and so this is like my original baby, my firstborn, if you will, and so it's really rooted in proactive inspections, and I think we have the best program in the nation, and I've heard of other programs, and they actually call us to ask how we do this. We are in people's units. A lot of other jurisdictions are only in like the main hallways and common areas. We're in people's units so that we can, because that's where people live. The three main causes of fire are men, women, and children. And I could add some more pronouns, but that's not it's not electrical. It's not lightning. It's what people do in spaces that really are the risk. So we have quite the inventory. We've got a commercial section, residential. We inspect every rental property, so single family all the way to your largest high rise, and then we inspect all commercial property, including the building you are in right now. The tools for compliance for residential, we have a grading system. So the grading system is kind of the carrot that goes with that inspection. So if you have a well-maintained property, it's on a point system. Your A property, you'll be inspected in 6 years, B, 4 years, C, 2 years, and D is the worst of the worst, and we'll see again in 1 year. We have reinspection fees, the revocation of the certificate of occupancy, which means nobody can be there. That is a tool in this, and then criminal citation. That revocation of certificate of occupancy, you might have heard that recently with respect to like Alliance Bank building, for instance. That was a condemnation of the fire certificate of occupancy for lack of utilities. And I've committed to every time I'm at a microphone that I will say the word administrative citations and how valuable they will be to us in this work, and certainly in this program, because we go from reinspection fees all the way to revocation. That is a huge gap where we have just not the right set of tools. So administrative citations would be really great assets for this program. Our code enforcement division, so we've got kind of the building safety. This is really your owner-occupied homes, and then all of, I would say, exterior type violations. So graffiti, illegal dumping, tall grass and weeds, unshoveled sidewalks, that all comes out of our code enforcement division, but also the vacant building program and the truth and sale of housing program. Believe it or not, this is the same house. So picture on the left was when we arrived, and picture on the right was not a few hours later. It was several months later. Our folks are really, really dedicated in working with people on where they're at and seeing how we can connect them to resources. Our goal is to have people stay in their homes if at all possible, and just show that progression and that the willingness to be safer in their environment. This is a few examples of things that we deal with. You know, the one on the left is not really illegal dumping. I mean, it is illegal, but it's more like, we tried. We got it in the area. Does it count? It doesn't count. We still need to have adequate garbage service. The one on the right, you know, this I believe is actually in a yard, and still, like, what we're trying to, the way this gets problematic is if you can imagine, has anyone been in New York City like right before garbage is collected? Then you know what can happen if everyone were just to like leave garbage uncontained. Heart is what you have on your agenda for that's in the paperwork, but HEART is the Homeless Assistance Response Team. And this was really born out of a gap that we saw. So we've done homeless work for a very, very long time, but there was this gap in the real outreach work that we were needing within the city. So a lot of the outreach partners are great partners, but the funding mechanism for them is not supportive of just what we call relentless engagement. So the goal is not to house people, believe it or not, it's to get them connected to the resources to get housed. But even so, we've actually housed 90 people with the HEART team, assisted 11 people directly into treatment, and we're removing barriers so that we can get to those placements. Countless housing assessments. So nobody can get placed in housing until they actually have a housing assessment to see kind of what their resources are, what their barriers are, what is a good fit, what are they looking for. Tons of relationships. Again, this is one of those areas where we do not do it alone. We hold weekly calls with over 40 providers, internal and external, on the call, all trying to share knowledge and about the ecosystem and what they're seeing out there and how we can do things to make a difference. So these are some of the stats. We've done over 8,000 to date through HEART, and HEART was established in 2019. You can see the stats there. The dip, I can tell you, is a very cold winter. That's what that is. People do tend to seek more indoor locations when it's cold. I will tell you though that that's not always a good thing, and I'll tell you why. People might choose harmful living situations that just aren't outside. Living with a partner who's abusive, making choices that aren't good for them, but it's not outside. And those are the tough choices. If you imagine those were your choices, I could live outside or I could stay with this person that I'm not safe with. That's what we call a rock and a hard place. So we're cognizant to not call that a good thing. That's just an indicator of some other things that are happening kind of in the ecosystem. So we do monitor our numbers very closely, but they're not just numbers. We know everybody's name. Our HEART folks know everybody's name who is outside, who's willing to share it with them, even if it's just an alias. And there's a lot of aliases. Again, we call it relentless engagement, collaboration and creativity. We will try anything. And we're really just figuring out what's going on with that individual person so that we can address the needs. And is that they don't have a place to get their mail, and so they can't get an ID? What is it that is their barrier? And we'll just start with one thing. The other thing is, when I hear people this is a very charged subject, and so I hear people say, well, I hear most people just don't want to go indoors. I'm like, well, not perpetually. That's not their life decision that they don't want to go indoors. And that's where the relentless engagement comes in, is because when they're ready to make a different choice, we're there. And we can't say, well, I'll be back next week and we figure something out. Nope, we're leaving now, pack up, let's go, let's get you to this place that you're ready to go to. And that's how you get 11 people into treatment, is because when they say they're ready to go, we're actually taking them there. We're not waiting several days to figure out, how to make that happen. You see our partners in police, and actually the CARES team here in that center photo. And if you notice, the gentleman's got thumbs in vest, right? Like that is the relaxed posture of police on a homeless encampment site, and that's what we expect to see. We're there, they're there really for us. They're not there to do anything of force, and actually we won't have them, if at all possible, do anything like arrest for a warrant while our outreach are there. They're there for our protection. Some folks, a former employee said, you know, if you just slept on the ground for the last 30 days straight with like the worst 50 neighbors you've ever had, you'd be pretty grouchy. And so some folks just aren't happy to see us, and our heart team has been called every name in the book, and that doesn't scare them away, bless them. But some folks do have just more than a bad day, or might have a mental health crisis, and we're grateful to our police partners who really understand this work and will take that relaxed police posture. You see our CARES team here in the picture too. One of the great things about CARES is they're not coming lights and sirens. You know, if we call 911 and say, yes, you know, we need lights and sirens, they'll come lights and sirens. But these are really checks on like frostbite toes or an infection in, you know, a wound in an arm or something. So they're not coming lights and sirens. They're coming in a more approachable manner to help and not scare folks off. And the picture on the right, that's actually an outreach worker talking to a camp resident and seeing, you know, what choice we might make today on getting to somewhere more safe. You notice too, we don't put, these are all our staff or outreach. You don't see a single photo of a resident. You don't see their face. We get many requests to take reporters out. These are residents. They're not a spectacle. This isn't a zoo, so we do not do that. Totally different subject. Animal services. Animal services. I learn so much from these folks every single day. We have field operations and shelter operations, and one of the things that I thought, you know, this is the little bit on the bottom here is one of the things I learned from them, and one of the ways in which some of our more like Animal Humane Society nonprofits might not fit what the needs are of St. Paul residents is that we see an increase in at-large pets at the end of the month or beginning of the month because of housing transitions, moving to a location that no longer allows pets. And so that's, you know, we don't have the capacity to take surrenders, but we often take surrenders knowing that it's the end of the month, and if I don't take this surrender, I'm just going to be picking it up on the corner of, you know, 3rd and Mariah any day now. So we work with residents in their needs because we want to make the best choice for them and our community. Our in-shelter operations, we have, you know, lost animals. We've got animals that have been voluntarily surrendered, but this stat on the bottom I'm super proud of, and we work with so many partners. We do not do adoptions out of the shelter right now just for lack of staffing. So we have to work with nonprofits and the Animal Humane Society being one of them to rehome animals. So we work with a ton of rescues, and but you can't achieve 90% live, they call it live release in the industry, but it's this is what you would call a no-kill shelter, and that's a really difficult number to achieve in this industry. Business licensing. So business licensing, we license, as you see, over 200 different types of businesses. And that's types of businesses, not businesses. So the things that you might be familiar with, like liquor stores and tobacco shops and bars, but we also like auto repair and massage therapists. And so it's really that consumer protection piece is where this comes in. And the goal really is to be able to have businesses in our community that help the community thrive. And it's kind of a trust but verify model, but it is One of the big ways that we have compliance is on the front end on review. So making sure that the people who are opening these businesses are understanding what they're getting into, because some of these businesses have a lot of regulations, and you really got to know what you're doing. So we do a lot of education on the front end so that we can have responsible business ownership throughout. We are complaint-based, so in any of those complaints, we start with education. Educate, educate, educate. Enforcement is always, way down the line. But in some cases, we do have to do enforcement. And then we also have compliance checks, and this is really with tobacco, and that's state law to have youth compliance checks. You'd be shocked how many people will sell to somebody under the age of 18. It's astonishing. So you would think that wouldn't happen and that you'd be a responsible owner and operator and check for IDs, but it still happens. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm almost done, I promise. So being at PCIARC, I wanted to make sure to highlight our connection with police. And we have actually a sergeant who works with us on business licensing too. So anything like we actually just published a notice of violation for a bar who has a bunch of violations like within a really close succession, and the police sergeant who works with us is able to review that footage and what's breaking the law, what's not. And so we work really, really closely with police on business licensing. But in general, the code enforcement officers, and that's the term that we call them. I don't know their actual rank, but they really know our business. Not every patrol officer, not every sergeant, sometimes not even every commander knows the work of DSI and knows how we can build on each other to achieve success in a neighborhood. Some things are police issues, sometimes they're livability issues, and sometimes they're both. So you have this police arm if there's illegal activity or suspected illegal activity, but usually where there's that, there's also livability issues. So, the pictures of the overflowing garbage, you've got, broken windows, you've got degradation showing you've got maybe too many people living in a space. And that's where you cross over into some of the DSI work. So we work really closely with our partners at police to address some of these neighborhood issues. And sometimes we're working directly with landlords and they have no idea what's going on. They show up to the house and well, I haven't been here in 6 months, which our first question is, why haven't you been here in 6 months? This is your property, this is your responsibility. So really working with partners and one of the is to actually call things in. And I know sometimes you might not actually see the officer who follows up on that call. Maybe you went back to bed. That's probably what I would do. But 911 prioritizes the calls. You are not inconveniencing, and I say this because I've heard the chief say it numerous times, you are not inconveniencing police by calling 911. Dispatch will prioritize the calls. You are not taking, because you're calling about a noise complaint, you are not taking resources away from an assault. You just aren't. So they triage the calls, and it's important to call data, data, data. If we know that there's an issue in an area, that's where the resources go. It's math. So definitely call if you see things. 911 for emergencies. Non-emergencies, 651-266-8989 for the stuff that you think the non-emergency folks can handle. There is a non-emergency police number as well, but these are the things that are livability issues. Overflowing trash, you think there's too many people living in a house, you think a business is operating outside of the hours that were established. 8989, it's, as you can see, it is answered Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 4:30, but it has a voicemail, and they pick up the voicemails every morning. There's also a web form that can be submitted, so encourage you to bookmark that. These folks take over 85,000 calls a year. Can you imagine taking 100 calls a day every day? And last year, they entered about 15,000 complaints, and it's housed in DSI, but we transfer calls everywhere. So it's your one call, to the City Hall. And with that, I am going to introduce my boss, Mayor Melvin Carter.
Good morning,
Afternoon.
evening, whatever it is.
That's you.
But the fact that I said morning means I'm a cheerful and optimistic individual, so
What did I do with my water?
I don't know. Right here. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, DSI Director Andrew Easy. Good evening. It is good to see you all here, and I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate you all serving as a part of our community first public safety framework, our community first public safety infrastructure that we've built here in St. Paul. We're really proud of, really, I'd say just two things about public safety in St. Paul. It's what we're doing and how we're doing it. How we're doing it, and I tell folks this all the time in St. Paul about the work that we're doing, whatever it is. How we're doing it is by engaging people together. My theory is that every decision that human beings ever make are made to benefit the decision maker. And so if we want policies, if we want investments from City Hall that are going to benefit a wider set of people, well, the most practical approach is to develop a wider set of decision makers on city-based issues. That's why when it comes time to decide who our DSI director is going to be, when it comes time to decide who our police chief is going to be, when it comes time to decide who the members of our cabinet is going to be, because I said our cabinet, that means we have to put those people into place. That's why we do public engagement, or what we call our community hiring panels. That's why right now we're in the middle of what we call our community budget games, because every year I have to bring a budget proposal in front of the city council, and it's not good enough. Many of you know my mother, my parents told me growing up, if your budget doesn't reflect your values, then they're not really your values. And it's not good enough for our budget to just reflect the mayor's values. Our budget has got to reflect our values as a community. That's more important today than it has ever before. Let me tell you that right now, we are in between a challenging economic climate for everybody who's following the impacts of tariffs and all those types of things. We are receiving letters every single day from Washington, D.C., telling if we want to maintain the federal funds that we use to hire police officers, the federal funds we use to employ young people over the summer, the federal funds we're using to eliminate lead pipes from our water system, that we have to sign up to be local agents of ICE. We have to sign up to disavow our work on climate. We have to sign up to disavow anything that they think is DEI. Now, you know that ain't happening. That's not our values. But that means we have to be clear what our values are. That means we have to be clear where we stand, what our priorities are. That's why our budget process is so critical and so sacred. And that's why we have to do it together. It's not good enough for a mayor to disappear in the third floor of City Hall and make up a budget on their own. We have to do this in community together. One of the first things that we set out to do when I became mayor, even before I became mayor, was think together about how we reimagine our approaches to public safety. Now, the world started talking about reimagining public safety just a few years ago. And I was really proud when I was on CNN one day and the reporter asked me, now that this happened, and by this they meant the murder of George Floyd. They said, now that this happened, what are you going to do differently? What is the St. Paul Police Department going to do differently? How is St. Paul going to approach public safety differently than because this happened? And I said, I have a one-word answer for you. And they said, what's the answer? I said, nothing. We're not going to do anything differently because this happened. And the reason we're not going to do anything differently because this happened is because all of the things that need to be done differently because this happened, St. Paul started doing differently before this happened. The St. Paul Police Department started doing differently before this happened. The St. Paul community started doing differently before this happened. And that has given us an advantage on the rest of the country. We understand public safety through this community first public safety journey that we've been on together. We've grown to understand public safety. And as the rest of the country, I think, grappled with whether it's police or community or police versus community or what, we came up with a framework that recognizes that emergency response is a critical and sacred part of our more comprehensive public safety framework. and that a comprehensive public safety framework needed a whole lot more than emergency response. Why I tell folks all the time, do me a favor, indulge me for a moment. Get a child in your mind who you know and love. Someone whose name you know, whose face you can call up. Are you ready? When we think about that child's safety, a lot of times when I'm at political debates and in political atmospheres, when we talk about public safety, we're just talking about police and prisons and stuff. But when we talk about a child we love's safety, I start thinking about car seats. I start thinking about outlet covers. I start thinking about gates on the stairs and Mr. Yuck stickers. I start thinking about every single thing we can possibly do to create an environment in which the terrible thing never ever happens. Our police chief, Axel Henry, who's in the room right now, talks really well about this. He talks about the history of bronze medals that our traditional public safety frameworks have won. The bronze medal being catching somebody after something bad has happened. After something bad has happened, we want to catch somebody. But that's not good enough if we love those folks. If we love those folks, the gold medal is never having called 911 in the first place because nothing terrible happened in the first place because we all worked together to create a safe community in the first place. Did I get that close to right, Chief? All right. And so that's the work that we've set out doing. And we've started doing some really simple things. We've forever had instances where some neighbor gets in a fight with some neighbor and some neighbor shoots a neighbor and then one goes to the jail and one goes to the hospital and then one gets out of jail and one gets out of the hospital and guess what? They're still mad at each other. That's not surprising. And we suddenly have built this broader framework, this broader infrastructure that gives us the capacity to actually relocate somebody, at least even temporarily, to let things cool down. This is new to a city, but it's not new to the neighborhood. Many of you know my father. One of the stories I know best about my father growing up was about when he turned 25. And he lost two of his closest friends, two of his cousins, in a double homicide about 3 blocks away from where we stand right now. And him and his cousins had a deal. He wrote about this in his book, so I'm not telling secrets. Him and his cousins had a deal. If somebody gets you, I'm going to get them. And in his book, my father writes about looking for this guy and never finding him. And finding out probably 2 decades later, reading my grandfather's journal, and finding out that my grandfather had gotten a hold of that young man's family and had paid for his ticket out of town to save his own child. This is stuff the community has gotten forever. So I'm proud of how we're doing it, but I'm really proud of what we're doing as well. My State of the City address was, 2 weeks ago? It's May. What is it? May 8th. And do you know that in the year 2025, we are yet to experience a fatal incidents of gun violence in our community in 2025. You may not have heard what I just said. I said that it is May 8th of 2025, and in the year 2025, the city of St. Paul has not experienced one gun-related homicide. We decided a couple years ago in my budget address, and I'll be quiet and move on in a second, but I'm really proud of this work. We decided a couple of years ago in my budget address, I shared that our goal is to make St. Paul the best place on the planet to find opportunity and a second chance if you need one, the absolute worst place on the planet to fire a gun. We do not accept gunfire in this community. And we work together, the chief and I, to build a plan to be able to tell you and all of our neighbors that if somebody gets shot in the pinky toe in this city, I have one of my favorite movies growing up, somebody gets shot in the pinky toe. And if somebody gets shot in the pinky toe in our city, we're going to show up and investigate and follow up on that as though we're a homicide. And what happened? We've seen in just 2 years, our case clearance rate for non-fatal shootings almost tripled. And I think the word is getting out that this is not the place to fire a gun. And that's thank you to the work of our police department, the leadership of our police department leadership team. That's thanks to an enormous amount of work on behalf of our Office of Neighborhood Safety. That's thanks to the work that DSI does to help foster a safe environment in the first place. The ultimate decision is that public safety isn't just the job of a police department. Public safety is the job of each and every single one of, none of us have a job that's not about making our city safer. None of us. And so I'm just really proud of the outcomes that we're getting. The final thing I'll say is this. My father, whenever the phrase community policing would come up, my father would say, that's a repetitive term. Yeah, and I've heard him say many times. And if you know my dad, you know he's not always necessarily bound by the rules of the Oxford English Dictionary. And he'd say, if it ain't community, it ain't policing. And I love that that's the ethic of our city. I love that we understand through the structures that we're here reporting out on today that trust can't be built, trust can't be established, trust can't be maintained in the dark. The type of relationship that we have to have between law enforcement and community requires public process. It requires the type of transparency that we're exercising today. It requires tough conversations. The people who I love, we have tough conversations to maintain those relationships. The people who I love tell me when they disagree with me. And our relationship doesn't break down because we have an agreement. Our relationship strengthens because there's disagreements sometimes. If we know how to do it well, if we practice doing it right, if we do it in a way that invests in our relationship. We know that the most sacred asset that we have to promote the safety of our community. We know that the safety of our community is the foundation upon which every other aspiration we have for our community must be built. And we know that our most sacred, and I'll say maybe our most fragile resource that we have for public safety is the trust, it's the relationships, it's the rapport that flows between community and our officers. And as an aside, before I let go, I'll say two things. One, it's good to see you, Councilmember Bowie. Thank you for your leadership on this and many other issues. Thank you for your vote on housing yesterday to make sure that we're able to produce housing solutions into the future for our city. I said two things and then I forgot the second one. I got so carried away thanking the city council member. I have no idea what I was going to say the second thing, but trust me, it was going to be brilliant. It was going to be very, very good. I'm proud of the work that we're doing. I'm proud of the outcomes that we're achieving. I'm proud of how we're doing it. I'm proud that we know as a community that we do better by expanding our teams, by expanding our trust, by expanding our we, not by trying to lock it up into a tight circle. I'm proud that we know how to work through difficult things together. I'm proud that we shine a light everywhere that we know that we need improvement. We know that we are not done doing this work. In fact, where my relationships with my children, or my relationships with my wife, my relationship with my parents, my relationship with everybody I actually love is concerned, I'm never done building trust. I'm never done building the relationship. I'm never done reinvesting. This is the work of all of us. These are the results that we're all getting working together. And let me tell you, every single day of the week, I go to bed and sleep just a little bit better because all of you are our partners in public safety for our city moving forward. Beth, thank you. The work of Hero to help support this space is absolutely critical. The work of our commissioners are absolutely sacred to our community. And without further ado, I think I'm introducing Sierra Cumberland, who is the chair of our PCIARC. Ladies and gentlemen, Sierra Cumberland. And go Wolves.
All right. Let's give a round of applause for Mayor Melvin Carter. Thank you, Mayor. We appreciate your time this evening. All right, folks. My name is Sierra, and I am real thrilled to be here with all of you this evening. This is my favorite time of the year, and it's just folks who are interested in public safety, curious about oversight here in St. Paul, and looking to learn more about the PCIARC. So, this is something that many of you may know, but In the 1990s was a time when many jurisdictions across the United States were being required to implement civilian oversight as a result of settlement agreements, consent decrees, but that wasn't the case here in St. Paul. Here in St. Paul, our mayor and our chief of police got together, our city leaders and city council recognized the importance of centering community perspective. And the purpose of the PCIARC was then, as it is now still today, to assure the public that police services are delivered in a lawful and non-discriminatory manner, and that complaints are dealt with fairly and with due regard for officers and citizens equally. So, we hope you don't need to file a complaint with the PCIARC, but we want you to know that if you have an encounter with a St. Paul police officer that doesn't go as it should, you can file a complaint with us in the Human Rights Department. Under state law, these complaints do have to be written and there needs to be a signature to them. So I'm not able to take a complaint over the phone, but you can file a complaint online. I can email the form to you. You're welcome to come meet with us in City Hall, or I can come out into community and meet with you at a place such as Rondo Library here. After complaints come in, they are investigated by our experts in the Internal Affairs Unit. There are a lot of state laws that govern that work. So once those folks pull together a very thorough investigation, then it goes to the PCIARC, and the PCIARC reviews the case and they will issue recommendations. So an investigation, what all does that include, right? So these commissioners get together and they have 2 weeks before the meeting, they receive access to these files. And these are some hefty files. I got to give a shout out to these commissioners because this work is not easy and it requires up to 20 hours per month of their time and dedication. So these folks watch body cam footage. They watch in-car camera footage. They read all of the statements, all of the information that internal affairs investigators are able to compile. Then we come to our meeting. If you're curious about PCIARC, one of the best ways to learn more is to attend one of our meetings. You can join us in person or online. All that meeting info is available on our website. We have meetings at different locations around St. Paul. So in 2024, the PCIARC reviewed 52 cases, and there's 124 total allegations. Now, those are very different numbers, right? So one complaint can come in and it can be about one officer or it can be about several officers. It can also include just one allegation, say improper procedure, which was the most common allegation that we reviewed in 2024. Or it could include multiple allegations, say excessive force and discrimination. That would be one complaint and 2 allegations. The commissioners are tasked with reviewing the complaint, reviewing all of the evidence, and then determining objectively were department policies violated. It's important to note that this process is independent from criminal court proceedings and civil litigation. This is an internal accountability mechanism. So the PCIARC works to come to a disposition, and they recommend whether or not there is sufficient evidence to support what the complainant is alleging in their complaint. You can see that in 2024, the most common disposition recommended is not sustained, followed up by exonerated, which is when the incident occurred of what the complainant said happened, but the officer didn't violate any policies or procedures. One other disposition that I want to call your attention to is policy failure, because I think that's a really important role of the PCIARC. Of when they watch footage, they receive a complaint that what the complainant is saying happened, but the officer didn't violate department policies, but our community didn't receive the service that was needed. And there's an opportunity to update those policies. The SPPD manual, I view it very much, it's a living document, right? Those folks are updating those policies constantly. And the PCIARC commissioners have an opportunity to make recommendations for policy updates directly to leadership of the police department. So when the commission takes a look at this and they recommend the disposition of sustained, they also recommend a disciplinary action to the chief. So these range from oral reprimand all the way to termination. And retraining is also something that can be added on to one of those other disciplinary recommendations. Here are the numbers of the disciplinary recommendations issued by the PCIARC in 2024. Oral reprimand was far and above the most frequently recommended disciplinary action. So the commissioners make recommendations. And so the chief of police is the one who makes the decision. He implements that disposition. In 2024, the chief of police, we call it a departure when he changes, makes a decision other than what the PCIARC recommended 9 times and departed 15 times from disciplinary actions recommended by the PCIARC. Now, that can be that the PCIARC recommended no discipline and the chief says, well, no, actually, I think a disciplinary action is appropriate here, or it can be the reverse. So after the chief of police issues a decision, it's important to note police officers are absolutely union employees, and so if the chief of police implements discipline, an officer can file an appeal. And he has the right to file a grievance, and that process takes some time. After that full process is complete, only then does a complainant receive a letter informing them whether or not discipline was issued as a result of their complaint. So, that is my very condensed overview of our PCIARC process here in St. Paul. Soon we are going to have a panel where you are going to be able to ask your questions directly of the commissioners. But in the meantime, I'm going to call up Axel Henry, who has been with the police department since 1990, the St. Paul Police Department since 1998, and he has been serving as our chief of police since 2022. Chief Henry.
Well, thanks everybody so much. Is the audio okay? I won't move this mic around. I want to thank you for being here. The PCIARC process is one of the most important kind of civic ways that you can volunteer or contribute to our process. Some people might think that in the position that I hold within the city, that a PCIARC or a review commission might be like the biggest pain in the butt part of my job. And actually it isn't. It's one of the most important things. And there's a really clear reason for that. And I think it will meld in very well with what you heard from the mayor and from our previous speakers. In St. Paul, we don't believe in that phrase of like police and community relations. We believe the police department's a part of the community. And if you're a part of something, your expectations are going to be higher. And a part of that is that we want to have other folks in our community looking at what we're doing, asking ourselves what works. And what that really does is it gives us an opportunity to get better. Some people look at high expectations and they deem them as a burden. We feel like our high expectations are a privilege. And I'd ask you to think about that in your own personal life, whether it's with your partner or whether a child or a parent. The opposite of having high expectations is having low or no expectations. And I don't think any of us want to work in environments like that. And we in the St. Paul Police Department certainly don't want to. So, I'm really excited by the fact that our PCIARC board is now full. I would love to get to the point where we have a waiting list, not that we're looking to get rid of anybody, but it would be great to have a deep bench. It's a really important way to serve in our city and to help our department be the best department it can be. You've heard about some numbers. I just want to also add just a little flavor. About 3 times as many complaints as the PCIARC sees we internally generate. So we are creating complaints all the time, and they're coming from a myriad of process. Every single use of force in our city, and that's for everything from me having to put my hands on a person and simply walk them out of a bar, maybe if they're inebriated, is a use of force. Those are reviewed, every single one of them, by a deputy chief, 3 district chiefs, our training unit, and other commanders. That happens literally week in and week out every time we do that. We also have tens of thousands of automated review processes. So myself and Senior Commander John Linson that are seated there, as we were walking up today, as we walked past the little alcove there where there's an exit door, there were a couple of unsheltered folks there, and we stopped to check on them, and one of them turned around and was finishing the last bits of a smoking substance in a glass ball pipe. We activated our cameras, of course, and we had a conversation and encouraged them that this was obviously not the right environment for that kind of behavior, and there are kids here and that kind of thing. Didn't turn into arrest, didn't turn into use of force. What will happen automatically without any choice for us is, because we get in the radio and we tell our dispatcher, we're here, we're doing this, that there's now a record created of that. In the next 24 to 48 hours, that system is going to go looking into our system and saying, you two were there, do you have footage? So it's going to want to know whether or not we recorded. And if we didn't, it's going to come knocking on our door and say, where is your footage for that? So we literally, and we do that with speeding, we do that with our, all the driving stuff, those types of things. So there's massive amounts of oversight that are happening in the background all the time. And the other thing that I want to address is, originally it was stated that this year we saw an increase in the number of cases the PCIARC reviewed. Anybody have any speculation about how I feel about that? Someone said good. Is that a surprise to anybody? I would love it if we didn't have any complaints. Let's not kid ourselves. That would be great. But I got news for you. We got a wonderful police department with wonderful officers that really care. But all of them are people. And people make mistakes. And when I see upticks, my first instinct is not, oh my goodness, someone's doing something more wrong or we're failing. I think, it might just be that people are feeling more confident and comfortable in making a complaint. My biggest concern is that there's someone out there that has a complaint but doesn't trust our process enough to pick up the phone and make the arrangements or come down and make the complaint. The process we have is going to look at it. The goal is not to walk around and slam things and say they're bad. Sometimes we have to do that. The goal is to make sure we are the best that we can be. What do NFL teams do after games on a Sunday? They go back and watch that game. We now have cameras, so we can watch almost everything we do, and they say, did that work the way we wanted it to? Did it work as well as we wanted it to? They talked about exactly how we told them to do it, and the outcome didn't turn out the way we wanted. Well, then we got to rethink that. The only way we get better is to put ourselves under the microscope and have that conversation. And so I would just implore you that if you've ever considered doing something, even though we're full right now, do the things in preparation that allow you to be a part of it. Obviously, you need to be a city resident, but our civilian police academy is one of the main things you have to do. We would love to have a deep bench of folks that are here. It is a super important task, and it is not something that our police department, this police chief being me, or our officers actually resent. We appreciate it because as members of this community, we know the only way we get to be our best is if we as a community look at what we do and work together to make sure it's the very best it could be. Thank you so much.
Am I supposed to call people up?
Apparently I'm supposed to call everyone up now for the question and answer period, so I just already messed up the first thing. Let's not make a complaint about that, though.
No, sir, not at all. All right. Thank you, Chief Henry. All right, so our panelists are the commissioners that were introduced earlier, Chief Henry, and we also have Commander John Kajacob. I was looking at Commander John Linson. Commander John Kajacob of the Internal Affairs Unit. Shortly, we will have the opportunity for folks to step up to our microphone and ask some questions. But before we do that, I just want to throw out a general question of why PCIARC? Would love to hear from a couple of our commissioners why they chose PCIARC, and we heard some great things from the chief, but would also be great to hear from the Internal Affairs Commander about how the PCIARC adds value to your work, sir.
Certainly. Thank you, Sierra. I think one of the challenges in being in this position initially that I thought of was having that opportunity to look at our record of what our officers are doing. And what I found in this position is the PCIARC is a great so the day in and day out work that we do together is extremely beneficial, not only for our community, but also for our officers. So it's been a great experience, and it's a great relationship.
Thank you. Would one of our commissioners be interested in sharing why they joined the PCIARC? We have 4 new commissioners up here, folks. Half the people you see had their first meeting here yesterday, and so they are brand new, and they're already stepping up.
Well, I'm Nancy Rodenberg, and I have been on PCIARC for 3 years, and I re-upped for another 3 years. You're allowed to stay on for 2 3-year terms. I came to this because it seemed very interesting. It fit my background really well. I'm a social worker by training and a professor, and I found that it is really interesting. And I really feel like I have something important to be involved in for the city. And I have really great conversations with my fellow commissioners.
Chevelle Webb, and I joined, I was the treasurer of the NAACP, and they wanted a person of color on the board, so that's me. And that's what I was told.
Way more than that.
Yeah. Well, that's how I was asked by Noel Nix. And so I came on because I'm passionate about policing. I had a brother-in-law killed in 1973 in Minneapolis by a Minneapolis police officer. He was shot in the back when my sister was 8 months pregnant with his child. And because I have black sons in the I want to make sure that I have a relationship with the police in order to, you know, navigate their safety, you know, and just everything that's happened with policing from George Floyd and prior to that, from Emmett Till to today. And I just want to make sure that if you're going to complain, do something. Like they say, if you complain about politics, make sure you vote. If you don't vote, don't complain. So I feel this is my second term, and I feel good about the work that I'm doing here. So, and you know, I want to speak up against if I see discrimination or racism, and being an advocate for our people. So that's why I'm here, and I stay here because of that. So.
Thank you. While we have folks line up at the mic, if you have any questions. Excellent. Our technician professionals are getting the mic ready to go in the center of the room there. But while they do that, commissioners, I talked about those dispositions earlier: sustained, not sustained, policy failure, and all of that evidence. What types of things do you take into consideration when you are making a recommendation to Chief Henry?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I try to take and try to keep like the emotions out of it and try to look at the policy and the situation on even side, and just, again, the emotions you really need to take out of it and just look at it holistically.
Thank you. And a slight update for those of you who know Beth Commerce is a very active director, and so if you've got a question, please raise your hand and Beth will come right on over to you.
Let me ask real quick. I'm gonna hold the mic. Sorry. No, I just wonder, when the recommendations are made to the chief, do you do this in person or is it online? Do you speak with each other or debate?
Yeah, so the PCIARC meeting, would one of y'all talk about what that's like to hold the deliberation?
Sure, I can talk about that. We discuss it amongst ourselves. We vote and make determinations. Coordinator Cumberland then writes all of that down in a summary for the chief and sends recommendations over to him. And then if he were to choose to depart from our recommendations, I, as the chair, receive a letter, and I have the opportunity then to meet with the chief to discuss that departure and have a conversation about decisions being made about kind of why the departure happened, what were some of the factors. And that's really informative for us in figuring out kind of what it is that the chief is looking at when he's talking about discipline as well.
Thank you.
Can I answer that?
Of course, please.
So the requirement is that when I make a departure and I notify them, we have to meet within 5 days. So this isn't something that happens, sometime to your question, that happens electronically. We meet via a Zoom meeting, and so we're able to, you know, because we have to set it up per the ordinance. And so there's about 4 variations that could happen. PCR could say that we felt this was sustained and this is the discipline. And I could say I don't think it should be sustained. So I'm saying that I don't, it's one of the other reasons that's on there. They could say, I think it's sustained and it should be this level, like a suspension. And I could say, I agree that it stays sustained, but I think it should be a written. It could be that they think it should be sustained and it's a written, and I think I disagree. I think it should be sustained but be a suspension. Or it could be that they think that it should be not sustained for some reason, not a punishment, and I say, well, I appreciate that, but I actually think there is a problem and I'm going to sustain it for something above it. So there's really 4 things, but we sit down and then talk about that to make sure that they understand why it is that, and I put the reasons in writing, of course, but that we have a discussion to talk about why that departure is happening and why it took place.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, I think the question is for you, Chief. So looking over this chart on page 13, it looks like that's the kind of description of those departures. Just kind of glancing over it, I'm noticing like the first top 2, the recommendation was termination, and then one resulted in a 5-day suspension, the other resulting in a 7-day suspension. It seems like out of the 15 here, I think only 2 of them were ones you chose to do something where they recommended none, where the other, I guess, 13, assuming it's 13, the departure was a lower than the recommendation of the commissioners. I guess I'd be curious as to how that's determined specifically, if that's something that as like a community member I have access to understanding like why, if there's documentation of why, just a little bit of information describing that. I mean, to me, I guess like termination to a 5-day suspension is like, that's a big gap that we're between.
Yep, so remember, it's important to remember that our PCIARC board are obviously civilian members of our community, and although they're very, very bright people, they are, none of us are true experts in discipline. So it will happen that a recommendation is made that I know from our city attorney's office, because I will run these by, that would never survive a contest. So if, let's say, for example, I fired the person, they would grieve that, and they would get their job back. And so I have to balance the fact of past practice and what we know about labor law and all the other things that have happened in the past to make sure that I don't come over too heavy and then lose it, because the worst thing that we can do when we're holding people accountable is to have that process not stay intact. I am very grateful that the entire time that I've been the chief, and that's been since November of 2022, we have not lost a grievance in that matter, and certainly not on a serious one. And the demotions that I've had to perform have not been flipped back around or any of those things. And so we have to make sure that we're doing it in a way that will survive a process of grievance. Sometimes there is already labor law and past practices out there that say, given that type of violation, we see this quite a bit if an employee breaks the law, and then has, because what happens if you, let's say I go out and get a DWI, I'm going to have to deal with all the legal ramifications from that, and after that's over, I'm going to get an internal complaint. And so we look back on every previous employee that's had the similar violation and what we typically give them, or they have to incur for that. And so that's why things like that happen for the most part.
Thank you. We have a question over here, please.
Okay, I have 2 questions here. Why is it so hard to get an appointment time to speak with the chief of police?
I'd first off have to know who you reach out to, but the schedule that I have is one that was probably the most surprising thing when I got this job. So my time is literally filled in and out. My executive officer is sitting right there. So they usually are trying to get you in touch with someone that could probably handle your problem more directly, because a lot of folks want to meet with me, and of course the very first thing we determine is I'm not the right person that can help you with that immediate problem. And our city is divided up in such that you basically have 3 different districts that have a district chief, and so a lot of times the very best place to start is in that district. And so it may be that they don't truly understand what the complaint is, or they're more likely trying to get you in touch with the right person to deal with that, if that makes sense.
Commander Jacob can help Ocean get a contact too.
All right, and my second question is, as a person with a disability, I myself made a complaint and was only told that nothing would happen, because while I was making a police report, a police officer called me crazy. So it really upset me for the fact that it's okay to let them get away with saying that to me.
I apologize. What's the question?
Well, basically, the question is that how the departments work, that it's okay for an officer to call somebody crazy when they're going in to make a police report?
Well, of course not. I'd have to know about the specific case, but you should know that every officer on a call would be wearing a body camera. So if indeed that were true, if we learned about the complaint, or even if you just called up, even if you didn't make in that case, you wouldn't even need to make a formal complaint. You could call any supervisor, and the first thing that would happen is, so let's say you didn't go down to PCIARC and make the complaint, the one that you have to have in writing, but you called the district, or you called any leader on our department, and we looked into that. We can, as long as the video has now been uploaded, which it would be at the end of the day, and we looked, even if you didn't make a complaint and that statement was made to you on recording, we would create a complaint on it now. So we would basically say that's not good enough. But my goal is that you feel comfortable in coming in and making that complaint and coming in, because that wouldn't be acceptable behavior as the way you've described it. That absolutely, that someone shouldn't be referring to you in that manner, or those types of things. So, and the good news is that we record it. And that's why, of course, when I was saying that we run that automatic audit for every call we go on, and why we would be flagged right away if we didn't have a video, my position has been, and I was the person who brought the body camera program, or developed the body camera program for St. Paul, is it is not typically the video we record that's going to get us in trouble, although it could in this situation. It's the video we don't record. Because can you imagine how a community member feels if you said that's what happened, we go to look at my body camera video, and I am like, oh, I didn't record that. What would we all think? Well, you probably did say it. And so that's why we are such sticklers about recording it, why we automatically run everybody all the time to make sure that you've created a video. Now, sometimes those audits they might turn into, I turned on the camera for this call, never shut it off, and then went to the next call, or dealt with the next incident, and so they say, we don't have a video for this incident over here, but then when they look, they realize, well, I recorded the whole thing, so they just tie two case numbers to one video. But when we find out that someone didn't record a video that they should have recorded, then there's discipline that gets involved with that, and that's that part that we do internally automatically.
All right, thank you, sir.
Good evening. I have a question about the process. So just for reference, I'm a social worker, born and raised in St. Paul. I work with policy. I read, write, review policy at the state level. I've also worked for the NRB. So I understand when, sometimes if a complaint is made, or if an employee is disciplined, they obviously have the right to grieve that, and sometimes those things are turned over. My question is about policy, and I can't remember who spoke on it specifically, but when you're reviewing policy, sometimes somebody may not have done something illegal, but they may have done something perhaps unethical, disrespectful, but it didn't violate policy. I've been on both sides of that. And how often, I guess, are you reviewing policies to ensure that these policies are applicable, these policies are outdated, these policies need to be updated with the times, so to speak? I mean, because oftentimes it's the policy that's the problem, as opposed to the individual or the past practice. So I know that was a lot to just kind of ask. Your policy, how do you handle that? Because that's a big part of the process. Thank you.
So our policies are reviewed literally daily, in the sense that we are constantly looking at everything. So the use of force is a perfect example of that, where every force gets looked at, so we're tweaking those. And on top of that, as everything that comes in that we review, and we overlay the policy on top of it to make sure that that policy still marries up with what we want for the behaviors for our people. The other thing that automatically happens is, if a policy hasn't been reviewed by a certain date, and they're all dated just like statutes are, that automatically says, we haven't had an overlay on this policy for a while, but we see now that it's been in existence for, let's say, 12 or 18 or 24 months, and we are still going to review it because we know that some things may not apply to something that we've actually had to look at, but it's been enough time that we want to make sure we're looking at it to make sure that it's updated. In fact, we just went through another one of those processes, and I believe that's the third since I've been the chief of police, where we just went through, just on dates alone, without actual triggers that would say that policy was out of compliance. And that's the third one since I've been, or that's just started, but the third one, and I've been the chief for 27 months. So it typically is happening even more frequently than like a calendar year.
And we mentioned earlier about how the PCARC also has the ability to issue policy recommendations. Would one of the commissioners mind talking a bit about what that is like on your side?
It's like you could read my mind. I will tell you, this is the thing that happens. This is something that does happen where we are reviewing the footage, we are reading the report, we are seeing the complaint, and we are looking at the policies, and we're saying, technically, this does not violate policy, but there's something not okay, and it just doesn't feel right. And what our role is to either specifically say, this is a policy failure, which becomes kind of a new disposition, or we can have a conversation about it. I think Commander Kajakob hears a lot of times, a lot of questions we have about policies, why they are what they are. Senior Commander Linson has been hearing them a lot lately because he's been in our meetings as well. So we do, I think, question that, and that's one of the things I take very seriously, and I think all the commissioners do, is to really interrogate, are our policies covering the things that we actually see happening that communities are really concerned about?
And if I could just add something, and the domestic violence area is a perfect example of this.
Yes.
When we saw the spike, we saw it at the same time they did. So when they came to us and said, we have some recommendations, we were like, well, good, because we're already starting some things. And sometimes it isn't the policy that's failed, it's that we failed the officers in the policy. And what I mean by that is, our policy has said, we want you to do X, Y, and Z when you go to a call like this. And over time, whether it's by supervision or something, the workforce has just started to not do the Z part. They don't do that last piece. And that's just been allowed, or something's happened, or something has stimulated the folks to think that we don't need to do that anymore. And so that tells us right away, we have to double down on this again, and so our department, because we do quarterly training all the time, will either create roll call information that goes out immediately or add it to the quarterly training to say, listen, let's pull this back out, let's dust it off. It's X, Y, and Z. Z is just, X and Y don't matter if you don't also do Z, to make sure they're doing that. And the policy itself says that, but the employees just weren't living up to it. And a lot of times it's not because they're trying to avoid the right thing. It's that they just, over time, it's that discipline to it has been eroded.
Can I add one thing to that? For sure. So kind of to echo what Chief Henry said in that regard too, there's lots of times where we're reviewing cases that don't result in discipline, but we see something in there that we think we can do better. Yeah. And that might result in a coachable moment for that employee where we say, are we being the best that we can be? And we might see something that doesn't result in formal discipline, but it results in a retraining or a coaching session to help get that person up to that high standard that the chief and our department has of our officers.
We have a question over here.
I don't know if it's so much as a question, but maybe it is. So I sit in the office of the NAACP, the St. Paul branch here, and so some of the complaints that that I get in regards to, and maybe this might be a different entity because the county jail, and I know that's the sheriff's department, but individuals that call in to try to make a complaint with IA and where they're saying they just constantly, the phone is ringing or no one has returned my phone call. I just want to be able to better direct individuals on how to get through, if it's going online or if it's contacting PCIARC here to get their complaint in, and some of the complaints that that have been really big coming from out of the county jail, because these calls are just coming in and they're free. And so they're able to call. So they're talking about food, not being able to eat or getting water, being restrained for a long period of time, not getting their medication. A gentleman that was on heart medication was not given his medication for 3 days, but then they released him because of his condition, and he ended up in the hospital for a couple of days because he was without his heart medication. And I know that when it comes in, that it has to have the label and all that on it. It has to be intact so that they can take it in, and it goes to the health, and then they're able to give him the medicine. But they didn't give him his medicine. And so that was another complaint. And then another one was someone complaining about pain in the arm that they ignored for a couple of days. And so I just want... In the jail. Yeah, in the jail. So I just want to be aware, and then the parent or the mother or someone's calling in to put in this complaint or trying to reach IA, and they're saying that it has been unsuccessful. And with these being built up around health, I'm the health chair. Yeah. So I actually took it on myself, and I just went down to the county County, and I was able to speak with someone in regards to the complaint, so we've been able to work together. So my thing is, just like my pastor, which is the president for the state NAACP, and much respect for him, amen, and everyone that is here, Chief Axel Henry, and so just being able to work together, you know, as one, you know, community, you know, and making sure that things are going well and that we're able to build, you know, and see things change in policy and wherever it needs to change at. And so I just wanted to share some of those complaints. And so when they do come in, I look at Shanika Johnson, I hope I said her name right, over Ward 7. So who would be the commissioner for the St. Paul branch area that maybe I could connect with to share?
Thank you. And before I turn it over to the panel, I want to say, Ms. Patricia, you can give me a call anytime. Though
I do.
Yes, ma'am. So the PCIARC process is specifically about complaints for St. Paul Police, but we will absolutely, I get calls all the time about folks in other jurisdictions, and I'm here to work with folks to find the appropriate entity for filing those complaints. Commander Kajacob, do you have suggestions about Ramsey County specifically?
Yes, just pointing out that they're a separate entity than St. Paul. But one of the fortunate parts about my job is I think we are so easy to get a hold of that I get complaints from agencies emailed or called to me from all over the state of officers, community members that have dealt with officers in different communities. And I'm always happy to refer them to that agency. So one of the fortunate parts about this position is I've had the opportunity to build relationships with other internal affairs. So your questions and concerns are extremely important. Even though they're outside of the realm of St. Paul, that's a conversation I will have with Ramsey County. I will echo your concerns with them and make sure that that gets brought to their attention.
And if I could just add one more point. You can imagine if it was a car mechanic or a doctor or anything else. Obviously, we'd like you to get a direct portal right into that agency so you can deal with it. But we have Metro Transit police officers that operate in St. Paul, Ramsey County Sheriff's Officer, you know, all kinds of different people. Just know, if you get a hold of us and it turns out we're not the right entity, we do recognize that sometimes a civilian who isn't maybe familiar with the process might feel like they're running into a brick wall. When Commander Kajacob calls any agency in the state and says, I'm the Internal Affairs Commander for the St. Paul Police Department, and I've got a report that was accidentally given to me that I'm here now giving to you, what do you think happens to the level of severity of how that complaint is treated? It shouldn't get any more serious, but it does, because now that agency also knows, on top of everything else, we're aware of it, and we might actually follow up on it ourselves and say, did that get handled? Because I know none of us want to walk out in community and tell someone, yeah, I'll make that connection for you. And then I turn around 5 days later and find out that that connection was never actually achieved. And so, again, we don't want to be the couriers for that, but whether it's the PCIARC or whether it's us, we are going to work to get you connected with the right resource that can help with that problem.
I actually have a question for the chief. With the PCIARC and the departure letter, and it just seems like, and I haven't had the experience, I didn't ask, I should have last night, but when we get the departure letters, is that like final, like if I disagree with you, I know we're already disagreeing because you departed from our decision, but if I feel strongly about it, am I able to have a conversation with you, or do I funnel it through the chair and just say, I feel strongly about your decision? Is that allowed?
So the PCR chair could probably answer the mechanical piece, because I don't know that I could say to you whether or not your process would allow you to do that. What I will say is, of course, it's not final, because if it were actually final, there would be no need to meet. So we do meet to make sure that something that hasn't missed or wasn't considered happens there. Now, whether or not that changes it doesn't mean that that isn't the possibility. So that's why the meeting occurs. Now, if your question is, we meet, we explain it, I don't depart, it goes back to you, and then now there's like an appeal to that, I don't believe that's a part of the process, but I would let the PCIARC answer that.
So I receive departure emails, and they are kind of the draft, if you will. And then I have the opportunity to meet with the chief to discuss that, and that could potentially be me attempting to persuade the chief that, in fact, he was wrong and we were right. I review, the discussion that we have. So part of it is that it is my responsibility to be able to convey the things that you all say in the meeting to make sure that it's understood what's happening. But after that conversation, then the chief will issue that official final letter, and then that's usually, unfortunately, when we get to the point where we're having that discussion as a commission, it's after that point. So it's not a perfect process.
Thank you.
And just for the crowd too, the letter itself, the departure letter, doesn't just say no. It actually gives all the reasons in there. And I'm very proud of the fact that the feedback that I received when I became the chief was that the letters got way better. They were way more inclusive in explaining what was going on about the intent and the reason and all the other issues that are there. So
I
it isn't-
second that.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, and I can confirm that, Chief. You're the third chief who's been doing this work since I've been in the city, and your letters have been received much better.
No shade on past administrations.
No.
Yeah, I have a question. My name's Larry Baker. I'm married to Nancy, one of the commissioners. And so I've been somewhat familiar with your process and actually attended as a tag-along spouse your national meeting 2 years ago in Chicago and was even more impressed. Anyway, my question though is, this process seems really quite legitimate and useful and all that. Do you get fewer lawsuits and particularly payouts for inappropriate behavior and getting sued and then having to pay out a lot of money? I know in some police departments there are millions of dollars are spent every year on this. Is St. Paul less? It would strike me that it would be with all the work that you do.
Well, I'm going to knock on wood again here because when the mayor was talking about our non-fatal and fatal shooting numbers, I'm not suspicious or superstitious about most things, but that's one of the things. It's hard to say that the timeline for legal cases, even since I've been the chief, there's been a couple of legal judgments ruled against the city. They happened before I was a police officer, but I wasn't the chief, and of course the chief doesn't necessarily control that. I think there are ebbs and flows to that. The other comparison that's super important for folks to consider is that the world, with some of the big national lawsuits that have happened, have kind of changed what is the normal amount that gets given out. So you may have, I would argue that there are probably less actual lawsuits that are achieved and successfully had, but the amounts have certainly skyrocketed over the years. So, it could be that I could get done with my term and be a person with very, very few lawsuits that occurred, whatever, but the next chief could come in and then those lawsuits percolate to the surface after I'm gone. So it's one of those things that are going on. I think a process like ours, at every level that's reviewing things, certainly drops that measure down. And I would tell you, the reason why our officers like it and why I like it is the level of confidence that people have when they think the PCIARC looked at it and we looked at it and this is what it was. So even if it's, I got a letter in my file saying that wasn't good enough, that that was looked at and you can feel like that was a fair process and that it wasn't gonna, because most people are fine with taking responsibility for their actions. They just don't want to get over punished. You can imagine if you have a kid at home and your brother gets grounded for a day for doing something and you get 2 weeks and you're like, well, hello, can I have something more consistent? That kind of a thing. That our officers know most of the time. They're willing to come in. And in fact, it's one of the things that I balance when I look at their responses is, particularly on the internal complaints, is were they contrite? Did they actually take ownership for their behavior? The thing I hate more than almost anything, and these guys know this, and I bet you'll all identify, is when someone makes all kinds of excuses for why they did what they did, and I'm just like, could you please just own the fact that you were maybe a little rude or something like that? And I think that's super important, and I want officers that will take ownership for their behavior.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. I know that there are probably more questions. We will all still be here. We are reaching the end of our time, so I would like to invite Vice Chair Forstrom to come up and close us out. Let's give a round of applause to our panel. Thanks, everybody.
All right. On behalf of the PCIARC Commission, I'd like to extend our heartfelt gratitude for each of you for joining us this evening. It is truly inspiring that so many of our dedicated community members gathered for our annual summit. Your presence reflects our commitment to our shared objective, and we are sincerely appreciative of the time and energy you have devoted to being here tonight. The annual summit serves as an essential platform for fostering transparency and accountability to the community members of St. Paul regarding the work undertaken by the PCIARC Commission. As we conclude, we have provided a survey that is written and a QR code back on that table, and we are strongly encouraging everybody to complete that. Please provide your honest and constructive insights. It's invaluable for helping us understand what is effective and what we can improve upon. And additionally, like everybody has stated, if you are interested in joining me and any of my fellow commissioners on the PCIARC, we encourage you to apply, and you can go to stpaul.gov/PCIARC for more details. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.